My guest today in conversation is George Lakoff, one of America's preeminent linguists, political thinkers, and contributors to how we actually think about politics. We're going to be talking today about what Democrats who want to be elected to office should be saying. George Lakoff, thank you for joining me today. First question for you. So what should Democrats be doing or saying right now in this very critical midterm election year?
They should say what it means to be a Democrat.
And what does it mean to be a Democrat?
A number of things. First, it means that as a Democrat, you promote the freedom and well-being of all. Number one. Two, you believe, as Lincoln said, that in a democracy, you have a government of, by, and for the people. And of means what? It means, same people inside and out. By means same life experiences on both sides. But also, for the people means you have to take care of the people. You're doing what you would call the common good. In addition, there's a view that started with the beginning of the country that citizens care about other citizens, work through the government to provide public resources for everybody, for both private life and private enterprise, because people are in business. And that started from the very beginning when we had public education, when we had roads and bridges and interstate commerce and laws for not only protecting people, but also for having a court system for business. And a patent office for business. This has been there from the very beginning, and you can't run a business or have a private life without public resources.
Now, this sounds very convincing to me. You're pushing on an open door, but have Democrats been saying this? Your implication is that they haven't.
No.
And if not, why not?
Because they don't think deeply about what their values are. They think in terms of issues, issue by issue, policy by policy. They don't think at the level of what it means to be a Democrat, what it means to be a progressive, and what they think the country is about. Every bit of democratic legislation that has ever been follows from what I just said. And if you ask them about this, they'll all say, yes, of course. If you ask them, have you ever said it? The answer is no.
And you say the reason they're not talking in this moral language of the common good is because they haven't thought about it. Let me play devil's advocate. Could it be that they are getting a lot of campaign contributions from companies and wealthy people that really care about something else?
I don't believe that. There are plenty of wealthy people who are fine, and corporations who are fine.
Fine in the sense that...
And that they would give Democrats campaign contributions in general. The fact is that most thought is unconscious. 98% is unconscious. It's carried out by neural circuitry. Every idea is in your neural circuitry. You have no conscious access to it. And so the things you most deeply believe, you may not be aware of.
Well, Donald Trump is certainly appealing to some emotional sort of reptilian brain that his followers seem to have. Is he not?
No.
What's he doing?
He's appealing to a different moral sense than we have. In this country, there are two very, very different views of what right and wrong are. Politics is about morality. It's about right and wrong. Anybody who says, follow my policy, assumes it's right, not wrong. They don't say, it's evil, go do it. So the idea is that you have different views of right and wrong. And on the conservative side, these things come out of what I call strict father morality.
Strict father morality. Okay, just wanted to emphasize that.
So in a strict father family, the father is the boss. He knows right from wrong. His job is to make sure that his children do what he says, because that by definition is right, and to punish them if they don't. And the idea is they shouldn't do what feels good, but should do what he says.
And the Democrats come out of, I gather, a different kind of morality that has something to do with maybe mothers.
It's not just mothers, it's mothers and fathers who are nurturant, who empathize with their children, who want their children to question them, to get to give answers to them when they ask those questions, to have a sense of well-being, and to have their children be fulfilled in life.
But George, isn't Trump also appealing to racism, xenophobia, fear, anger of the other? Doesn't this go beyond the strict father notion?
You have to know what the strict father says. Strict father morality, when you map it onto politics, gives you a moral hierarchy. It says this is the right way to think, that the people who are disciplined are the best people, and they're the people who have won out in the world, and that gives you a moral hierarchy. And the hierarchy is simple. You have God over man, religion has won out. The rich over the
God over man,
religion has
wins
won
out.
out.
Yeah.
They have won out. You have man over nature. Nature is there for you to take advantage of it. Drill, baby, drill. You have the rich over the poor. They deserve it. You have employers over employees, adults over children. Children can be beaten with sticks in 21 states if they don't, just listen to their teachers and their coaches. You have Western culture over non-Western culture, America over other countries, men over women, whites over non-whites, Christians over non-Christians, straights over gays. That is the moral hierarchy that's there. And every bit of Republican legislation, conservative Republican legislation, fits that moral hierarchy.
And if I get you straight, this is not just Trump. This is republicanism going back how far? Does this strict moral, strict father morality, does this come? Where does this come from? When did it start?
It's there all over the world in many, many, many countries. It has to do with the idea that every child acts on the basis of what's good for the child, and what's good for the child is either that it's being nurtured or that there's an adult that they're listening to and who will take care of them if they listen to them.
But why now, George? I'm sorry to interrupt, but if it's been there all the time, and this kind of strict father morality has been enunciated by the Republican Party, certainly in the modern era, why has it become so dominant now? Is there something going on in the world or in the United States that makes this particularly appealing now? Or is it simply that Democrats have forgotten their message?
Well, Democrats never understood what it was. They didn't understand conservatives, and they don't now. They don't understand what a conservative is, but it has to do with that. Basically, since Goldwater lost, and he got 37% of the vote, basically 37% plus or minus 2 has been consistent from 1964 to the present. That's the strict father populism that's out there. That's the Trump base. It's out there, and all he has to do is get a small number of additional folks who have some conservative views or other, and he's got a majority. But what happened in the election was the Democrats never understood this. They thought that union members would necessarily vote for them. A lot of union members are strict fathers at home. They didn't. They assumed that all Latinos would vote for them. Well, there's a macho culture among Latinos. A certain number of Latinos voted for Trump. They assumed that educated women would vote for Hillary. A lot of educated women are Republicans and have that view of the world.
The strict father morality.
And they never polled on values. They polled on only demographics. That's why the polls failed. They just looked at, how much money you're making, what are you doing, how much education you have, where do you live, are you married, unmarried, but they never polled on people's values.
But if the alternative to the strict father morality is nurturing, talking about the common good, talking about what we owe each other as members of the same society, why is that likely to get more than 50% of the vote?
Because you have what is called by conceptualism. That is, what is a moderate? A moderate conservative has some progressive views, a moderate liberal has some conservative views. Now, in order to have two different views in the same brain, you have to have both worldviews present at once, but one of them used more than others.
So let me just pause. Two worldviews. I just want to make sure everybody is following. That is the strict father morality and we didn't really give it
nurture and parent.
Nurture and parent morality. They are simultaneous in most people's brains. Again, why would the nurturant parent win out over the strict father?
It depends on how you communicate. If you're talking to someone who is largely conservative but partly progressive, you need to not move to the right to talk to him. There is no center. You need to talk to them in progressive terms, in terms that will reach them. Not only that, there's a very important fact about conservative communities. In a conservative community, uh, people who are in that community have what I call in-group nurturance or in-group care. They really care about people in their churches, in their communities, in their families, in their in-groups. And I have friends who have moved from progressive to conservative communities, and they say, "Oh, these people are actually very nice to me." And in fact, they're not, because you now want to be they're one of their in-group, and this is normal. It's not that conservatives are necessarily mean like conservatives, like liberals think they are. They're very nice to the people in their communities, who have their values. But their values are at the level of individual help. This is a matter of individual responsibility and so on, but it's also a matter of individual care. If you talk to a conservative, you say, "Do you go to church?" You say, "Yeah." "Okay. Is there anybody in your church who's sick? Who doesn't have insurance? Is there anybody in your church who's unemployed, who's lost their job? How do you feel about that? Do you think you should be able to help the people in your church?" And in general, they want to help the people in their church. The question is, how do you expand the in-group? How do you get them to be concerned about a larger group? And it turns out that is possible and happens. It happened in Houston during Hurricane Harvey, when the people who went out there in boats rescuing everybody were conservatives. They're the people who had the boats. And it didn't matter who they were rescuing because all of Houston had become their in-group.
But the strict father morality, as I understand it, would still be very suspicious of government and
Absolutely.
anything that is not a voluntary action. I mean, this is Ayn Rand. It goes
Absolutely.
back to the origins of the kind of really free market, freedom definition that we saw coming out of conservatism in the 1950s, 60s. It's the basis of libertarianism. How do you, as a hypothetical Democratic candidate, talk to people who really believe in being generous, as you're suggesting, but being generous only on the basis of when they want to, not because government tells them to?
Well, again, if they're in a conservative community, they care about their in-groups. And so you have to talk to them at the level of individual people. And individual people who, for no fault of their own, happen to have cancer, happen to have diabetes, happen to have lost their jobs, etc., in their churches, in their families, in their communities, people they care about. And then the question is, how do they feel about that? And there's a general question you can ask in those communities. Like I used to have my students say, "I'm going to have Christmas dinner with my grandfather. I don't want to have a fight with him as usual. What do I do?" And I'd say, ask him one question. He wants you to respect him and he wants to love you. So ask him, what are you most proud of that you've done for other people? And what happened 100% of the time, the students would come back and say, "My grandfather has done at least three wonderful things for people." And I say, keep talking to him about those three things. Because what that does is activate in his brain the idea of care and empathy. That's the idea. You want to do that. And the conservatives have done their version of it very effectively since 1994. In 1994, they set up the Leadership Institute. That Leadership Institute has trained, after 20 years, 160,000 conservatives all over the country who get talking points every day and get booked on radio and TV and talk conservative talk. And as they've done that, day after day after day, a number of progressives have heard that, and it's changed their brains. That is,
Literally change their brains.
literally, physically changed their brains, because every idea you have is in your brain.
But how is it? Again, I understand what you're saying. You activate the part of the brain that is generous and nurturing. But even when you do that, if a conservative is activating the part of your brain that is fearful and suspicious and worries about black people or brown people taking things away from you, or it worries about government taking things away from you and giving it to black or brown people. How do you, as the progressive, overcome that other message?
You don't, the first thing not to do is to repeat it and negate it. I have wrote a book called Don't Think of an Elephant. It's like, Nixon said, I am not a crook. You thought of him as a crook, right? The worst thing to do is to take those conservative views, repeat it, and then give data or facts and so on, show it's wrong, etc. You're just, because when you repeat it, you activate it in people's brains again. You just make it stronger. What you need to do is give your view of the world, give your framing of the way you understand the country. This is a country that is of, by, and for the people. Very straightforwardly. Are people going to? Who's going to deny that? You need public resources for private life, and you can list them like crazy. You need your roads and bridges and airports and so on, and science and technology, which is usually funded originally by the government. Without that, nobody could do any business in the country. And this is important to understand and to be repeated. The more you repeat it, the stronger the idea gets, because neural circuitry gets stronger the more it's activated.
So let me summarize what I'm hearing you saying. It's not a matter of directly contradicting what conservatives are saying about fear, about those people, xenophobic, about women, about blacks, about Latinos. It really is a matter of activating different circuitry in the brain that has to do with nurturing and generosity, and we're all in it together, and the common good. And that activation of that circuitry gives you, as a progressive, a better chance to be heard and to be liked and to be elected. Is that right?
That's right, but you need to choose your frames carefully. The reason I suggest of, by, and for the people is that we all learned that. We all learned that with the Gettysburg Address. That is part of our understanding of patriotism. And we have to go back to what patriotism is about, and about what government, public resources are about. You need to point out that you can't live your life without public resources. You can't have a business without them. And that is that has been there from the beginning of this country, and it's what's made the country great. And you have to repeat it and repeat it and repeat it. And if you're a candidate, when you have any sort of proposal, you don't just go issue by issue by issue. You say, what is the generalization behind the issue? What is the moral principle behind this issue? You say your moral principle, and you say why this carries out that moral principle and why there are moral consequences. Because people vote their values, and this is what's most important. Anybody's sense of right and wrong comes from the idea that everyone wants to think they're doing right, or at least trying to do right. And that means their identity is bound up with their morality. And what's happened with conservatives, let's say under Obama, conservatives felt that their sense of identity was being challenged by the very existence of Obama, who was down on their moral hierarchy, who was below. The racism follows from the strict father morality. It's not that it's just racism by itself. It's part of a system. And they felt that they were oppressed. They felt that they, as Americans, their view of right and wrong was not the way the country was being run.
You're talking, again, they being not only the Trump supporters, but generally speaking, white, mostly men, mostly rural, mostly on a downward economic escalator.
They happened to be that, but they weren't all that. They happened to be educated women, a certain number of Latinos, all sorts of people who were union members. Whoever had strict father morality and who identified as such were the people involved.
But if I follow your argument, we all have, to some extent, circuitry in our brains that corresponds with strict father morality. Yes. You're saying that the failure of Democrats has been to fail to ignite a different set of circuits.
That's right. The Democrats failed, and failure to recognize what a conservative was, and to think that their polling should be based only on demographics. They missed all of those values.
So why did they miss it? And why do Democrats, and certainly in your lifetime, my lifetime, Democrats tend to run campaigns on here's my policy, here's my next policy, here's my next policy, rather than values? Why is that? When you have conservatives, even Donald Trump, who is a marketing man, a con man, well, he understands values even if he never articulated the importance of that kind of circuitry.
Right. Trump was a salesman. He had those values all of his life. He instinctively developed them and knew how to carry them out, unconsciously, automatically, but according to certain principles. Trump uses certain principles. Everything he does is strategic. He's not dumb. He's very strategic. Now, what's important about this is liberals, and especially people in the Democratic Party, believe in Enlightenment reason. 1650, Descartes. Now, in 1650, this was wonderful.
Descartes was a terrific teacher, by the way.
I'm
I
sure-
learned everything I know from him.
I know.
Yeah.
A lot of people did, and I originally did too.
So Enlightenment. So again? Why are Democrats, or why did Democrats succumb, if you want to put it that way, to so-called Enlightenment reasoning, which I assume is logic and kind of analysis and policy and all of the kind of things that we value in the academy.
And more. It assumes, Descartes said, I think, therefore I am. All thought is conscious. It's 98% unconscious, as we learned from neuroscience. He assumed that thought was just logical reasoning as in a mathematical proof. Turns out that the real reasoning is based on frames, narratives, metaphors, and emotions. That's how people really reason. And anybody who's taken a course in business school on marketing knows that perfectly well.
And Republicans tend to be pretty good on marketing and business. They come from business schools,
Right.
and Democrats don't. They're from the humanities, generally speaking,
And they take
and social
courses,
sciences.
and they take courses in political science, law, public policy, economic theory, and they learn Enlightenment reason, which is empirically false. They're basically science deniers. They deny neuroscience and cognitive science, the science of their own minds.
But that gets us in, and I don't want to keep you, George, but this gets to the final set of questions I have. If Democrats begin appealing to this kind of emotional circuitry,
No, they're not emotional circuitry. That's a mistake. They are reasoning circuitry. They have to do with real reason. You reason in terms of frames, and you can't not reason in terms of frames. Frames are mental structures that are there in everything you understand, in the definition of every word in terms of your brain.
I understand that. But what you are saying, and I take away the word emotional, what you're saying is the way to get into people's brains is to use frameworks or frames that correspond to deep structures in the brain,
Yes.
deep ways in which we think. Those are either, as you've framed them, either a strict father morality or much more of a nurturing we're all together. You say Democrats ought to appeal to the circuitry, the way of thinking that is having to do with all together. But here's my question. Is that dangerous for democracy?
The opposite. Democracy is based on those things. It's based on a government of, by, and for the people. It's based on the idea of having public resources for everybody. It's based on all those ideas. And that's what democracy is. And what is good about it is that you say, if you know what you believe, if you know the unconscious beliefs, moral beliefs you have, and can state them and say them over and over, other people can understand what a Democrat is and why it's important and why it's patriotic. They can't, if it's not said, if it's policy by policy by policy, they get laundry lists.
Is democracy in any way right now threatened by oligarchy, threatened by an anti-democracy represented by, in your terms, a strict father morality?
It is deeply threatened. Trump is a threat, the biggest threat we've had in this country since the Civil War.
I mean, actually, one final quick question. What are the chances Democrats are going to understand what you have just been saying?
It depends on whether they hear it from other people. The reason we have set up a citizens communication network and getting it out to as many hundreds of thousands of people as possible is to be able to get Democrats to understand this and to say it over and over and to tell the people in their party that they really have to go out and find out about how frame works. That's why Gilderan and I have set up, a Frame Lab Communications, where we can work with people in the party or work with other social groups. We have now got the apparatus to do that and do it effectively. But we need to be able to get through to the Democratic Party. And the problem with the Democratic Party is not just Enlightenment reason, but it's all the people they generally hire, the pollsters they hire, the strategists they hire, the PR firms they hire, who all believe in the same things.
It's an ecosystem that feeds off of lots of money that comes into the coffers of the Democratic Party, and that ecosystem makes it very hard for the party to change its ways.
Exactly. That is, all of those PR firms get their money through ads. They get 15 to 18% of every ad buy, and they give some of the money back to the party, and that helps fund the party, and it's an ecosystem. That ecosystem has to change, and it can only change if people know what it is and know how dangerous it is.
Well, hopefully this interview will help. George Lakoff, thank you.
My pleasure, Bob. And by the way, when your book, The Common Good, comes out, we hope that you will join us on a Frame Lab podcast.
Great.